Hi there. Welcome to Chapter 2 of the textbook. Chapter 2 is one of the most important chapters in this course. In this chapter, we learn how information systems help support organizational strategy. The big question we want to answer is, how does organizational strategy influence and determine the structure of information systems in an organization? All right, we're going to do this through a number of analyses. First, we're going to see how to determine industry structure. And here we'll use the well-known 5 forces model proposed by Michael Porter of Harvard. We'll then see how does industry structure influence competitive strategy. How does competitive strategy influence the value chain? And how does it determine the business processes and the structure of the information systems within the organization? All right. And so in these ways, we'll answer the question about how do information systems support an organization's competitive advantage. Now, I want to start this chapter with the example of Walmart. Walmart is a company that we are all familiar with, and I'd like you to think of the following questions one by one about Walmart. So the first question is, what is the structure of the industry in which Walmart operates? Now, if you think about this question, it's a very competitive industry, right? And it's consumer retail. So whether it's brick and mortar or online, it's a very competitive industry. The next question is, what is Walmart's competitive strategy in this industry? How does Walmart differentiate itself from competitors? And we all know that Walmart employs the strategy of high volume, low cost, right? It is basically a cost differentiator, right? It prides itself on providing all sorts of products at the lowest possible cost, right? That's Walmart's competitive strategy. Now, how does Walmart's competitive strategy affect its value chain? Value chain is nothing but the network of activities that go on from inbound to customer sales and post-sales that help Walmart do business. What does Walmart's low-cost strategy mean for its operations? Right? And think about, if you are a low-cost provider in an industry, you need to make sure that your operations are very, very efficient, right? That your operations cost you as less as possible, right? So Walmart has to have very efficient, effective operations in place. An example of this is just-in-time inventory, right? Walmart cannot afford to have loads and loads of inventory on its shelves. No, it has to time its inventory correctly, right? According to consumer demand. If it carries a lot of inventory, then there are inventory carrying costs, right? There's a cost to holding that inventory, both in terms of money and space needed. Also, if it carries very little inventory, then it might run out of products, right? It might not be able to satisfy customer demand. In other words, Walmart needs to make its operations, including its inventory and so on, very efficient, right? Therefore, it negotiates with its suppliers the lowest possible price, uses efficient supply chain systems and so on. And these things then help Walmart achieve its low-cost strategy, right? So we've touched on the next question a little bit. How does Walmart's value chain, for now, let's think of value chain as operations. How does Walmart's value chain affect its business processes and the structure of its information systems, right? Basically, if Walmart needs to have very efficient operations, then it must employ very efficient business processes, right? It must structure its business processes in a very efficient way. And similarly, it must employ appropriate information systems. It must have appropriate information systems in place to help it achieve its low-cost strategy, right? So you can see how competitive strategy leads to the structure of information systems. how competitive strategy influences the structure of information systems that are deployed at Walmart. Right? So Walmart would invest quite a bit in its information systems to make sure that it is using the top of the line or the up-to-date information systems that can help it make its operations as efficient as possible so as to support its low-cost strategy. Right? So that's chapter 2 in a nutshell. Right? If you've understood that, then we've answered the question of how information systems support Walmart's competitive advantage. And we've basically captured the whole chapter 2 in a nutshell. Right? We went from industry structure to Walmart's competitive strategy and how Walmart's competitive strategy needs to or demands efficient business processes and demands efficient information systems. Okay, so that's chapter 2 in a nutshell. We're going to go through this chain of industry structure, competitive strategy, value chain, business processes, and information systems more formally throughout this chapter. And it is one of the most important chapters in this course because it tells you how industry structure influences the structure of an organization's information systems and how these information systems help support an organization's competitive strategy. Right? In your group project, you will also be thinking about your own industry structure and your own competitive strategy. Right? What is the competitive strategy of your startup going to be? Right? And you'll go through this process in your group project as well. Right? Now, there are 3 main frameworks that we'll be going through. The first one is called Porter's 5 Forces. The second is Porter's, again, the second and the third framework were also put forth by Michael Porter. So we're using Michael Porter's frameworks here in this chapter. The second framework is Porter's competitive strategies, and there are 4 competitive strategies. The next is the value chain, and those are the 3 main frameworks. The last framework is the author's 5-component framework for information systems. Right? We've studied this in chapter 1. Right? Okay. As part of this chapter, we will also be learning how to model business processes using the business process modeling notation, BPMN. Okay. So let's start with the question of how do we determine industry structure? Right? How do we determine the structure of an industry? Keep in mind, industry is separate from the firm, from the company itself. Right? Industry is the broader sort of environment in which the firm operates. Right? How do we determine industry structure? And there is a well-known and very widely used framework called Porter's 5 Forces framework that helps us determine industry structure, the structure of any given industry. What are the 5 forces? Well, Porter's 5 Forces model basically says that any industry structure is influenced by 5 forces. What are the 5 forces? At the top we have competitive rivalry. Competitive rivalry. Right? How intense is the competition in the industry? Are there only a few competitors in the industry, or are there many competitors? The second force is the bargaining power of suppliers. Right? Do suppliers have a lot of power, have a lot of negotiating power in the industry? In the case of Walmart, you might imagine that suppliers do not have too much bargaining power. Right? Walmart probably has more bargaining power over its suppliers. Right? So the bargaining power of suppliers in the case of consumer retail, brick and mortar, or online is probably low. Right? What is the bargaining power? This is the third force. What is the bargaining power of customers? Right? Can customers switch easily to other vendors in this industry? Right? The next force is the threat of substitutes. Are substitute products readily available to customers? Right? And these two sort of tie into each other. The last force is the threat of new entrants. right? So not only do we look at existing competitive rivalry, but also how easy or difficult is it for new entrants to come into the industry, right? And in the case of Walmart, especially if it's a brick and mortar establishment, it's very difficult for new entrants to come in, right, and establish the network of stores that Walmart has established, right? So the threat of new entrants in the case of Walmart's industry is low, right? The threat of new entrants is low, right? So together, these 5 forces help us get an idea about what is the industry like, right? Now let's go through each of these 5 forces a little bit more. Competitive rivalry, as we discussed, is about the number and strength of your competitors. The bargaining power of suppliers. If your suppliers are the only ones who can supply a particular service, then they obviously have considerable supplier power, right? Bargaining power of customers. How easy is it for customers to switch to new, cheaper competitors? And this can actually drive down prices in the industry. The threat of substitutes, when customers find it easy to switch to another product. Again, these two are somewhat related. Lastly, we have the threat of new entrants. If it takes little money and effort for another competitor, a new competitor, to enter your market and compete effectively, then rivals can quickly enter your market and possibly weaken your position. Okay, so these are Porter's 5 forces. This is a very important concept, and you will likely see it in one of your management courses as well, right? So always good to keep this in mind. In this course, in this MIS course, we are trying to see how these 5 forces determine the firm's competitive strategy. So how do these 5 forces determine, for example, Walmart's competitive strategy? And then how does that competitive strategy determine the business processes and the information systems that Walmart needs to implement, right? Okay. So this slide, we do this analysis, the 5 forces analysis for the online retail industry. And we can take Amazon as an example, right? Starting with internal competition or competitive rivalry. It's probably very high, right? Customers do have alternatives, right? The threat of substitutes is also quite high. Customer bargaining power is probably a medium, because if you are a prime customer of Amazon, it's difficult for you to switch out of Amazon, right? You're paying the monthly prime membership fee, right? And so you are likely to keep using Amazon rather than switching to another online retailer, right? The threat of new entrants is probably low, right? It would take a company, a new entrant, a lot of capital to come in and establish an online store like Amazon and so on, right? And to gain that credibility with the customers and so on, right? And supplier bargaining power is probably low, right? If you are a supplier to Amazon, you are likely to go according to Amazon's rules and so on, right? So that's a simple analysis for Amazon. This analysis can differ depending on if you take a specific industry in which Amazon operates, because Amazon does operate in multiple industries. For example, you have Prime Video, you also have Amazon in music, and you also have Whole Foods, which has also been acquired by Amazon. So depending on the industry, this analysis could differ. We can do the same analysis for Creighton University, right? Again, internal competition or rivalry is probably high, right? Students have a lot of choice when it comes to picking a university, right? And it depends. If you have a preference to go to a Jesuit Catholic school, private school such as Creighton, then you probably don't have too many choices. So in that case, your competition or internal competition would probably be medium to low, right? So again, this depends on how you define the industry as well, right? The threat of substitutes is probably medium to high, right? Customer bargaining power, once you have become a student of Creighton, it is unlikely that you will switch to another university. So I would say customer bargaining power to be low. Supplier bargaining power, here we can consider supplier as the faculty, right? And so faculty probably have somewhat of a say in their salaries, for example, right? Depends on if the faculty is publishing actively, how good of a teacher are they, and so on, other factors, right? And the threat of new entrants is probably low, right? Although if you consider the online education industry, there are probably a lot of alternatives available, right? All right. You will need to do this analysis for your own startup as well, right? So identify the industry in which your startup operates and then conduct somewhat of a detailed analysis. The analyses that I showed you were very quick and dirty, right? So you would have to conduct a slightly more detailed, a slightly more nuanced analysis of each of these 5 forces for your industry. Okay, and let me know if you have any questions as you are going through this exercise. Okay. All right, and next we come to, once we've analyzed the industry structure, once we've analyzed what our industry looks like, what should our competitive strategy be? What should our firm's competitive strategy be? How should we compete in this industry, right? And that is what Porter's 4 competitive strategies framework lays out. And Porter says that a company, keep in mind that now we're talking about the company, this specific organization, the firm which we are operating, right? Not the industry. All right. Porter's 4 competitive strategies framework says that a company can differentiate itself based on either cost or product differentiation, product or service differentiation, right? Meaning it can either be a low-cost provider, such as Walmart, right? Walmart is a good example here. Or it can differentiate its product, meaning it can make a high-quality product and differentiate itself based on that. An example here would be Apple. Another dimension that Porter identifies is whether the company does this across the industry. So the company can do this industry-wide, or it can do this in a particular customer segment, in a particular specific segment, right? So you can have focused differentiation where you are offering a better product or service within a specific industry segment, right? That would be this quadrant here, right? Quadrant because there are 4 cells here. So this quadrant here refers to the strategy of focused differentiation. This quadrant here refers to the strategy of focused cost, right? Where a company offers the lowest cost within an industry segment rather than industry-wide. Okay. Walmart, think about Walmart. Walmart is an example of industry-wide cost leader, right? So Walmart would fit into this quadrant. This is where I would put Walmart, right? WMT is just the stock symbol for Walmart. Industry-wide differentiation, a good example here is Apple, right? So I would put Apple here, right? What's an example of a focused cost differentiator? So something like Dollar General would come here, where Dollar General focuses on cost differentiation, right? Focuses on being a low-cost provider, but within a particular segment. And the segment that Dollar General focuses on is the rural and small towns in the US, right? So the underserved populations where major retailers like Walmart do not generally operate, right? Now, obviously, things have changed over time, and we do see Dollar General present in major cities as well. But originally, this was Dollar General's motto, right? What's an example of a focused differentiator, meaning a better product or service within an industry segment? I would say Whole Foods, right? I would put Whole Foods here. Right, and Whole Foods has been acquired by Amazon. But Whole Foods focuses on providing a better quality product, right? They provide organic, high quality foods, and they focus on a specific segment, right? The segment that utilizes such foods, right? So these are probably a higher income earning segment that Whole Foods focuses on, right? So it's an example of focused differentiation. All right, you will need to do the same thing for your own company, right? Once you've identified the industry structure, you should then identify which of these 4 competitive strategies would work best for your business, right? Okay. So here, I've just given you the examples here. Walmart fits into the industry-wide cost leadership example. Apple fits in this quadrant, where it's an industry-wide better product or service. Dollar General fits here, where it's lowest cost, but within a specific industry segment. And Whole Foods provides better product, again, within a specific industry segment. Okay. You would need to do the same for your startup as well. All right. Okay, next we come to the idea of value chain. So once we've understood how our industry looks, we've determined the industry structure using Porter's 5 forces. We've identified our competitive strategy based on Porter's 4 competitive strategy framework. Then we need to map out how does our value chain look, meaning how are we going to create value for the customer. So value chain is nothing but the network of value creating activities through which the business creates value for its customer. Okay. And there are 2 main types of activities in the value chain. The first set of activities are called primary activities. Primary activities. And as the name suggests, these are activities, or these are business functions that are directly related to your product or service production. Right? The second set of activities are called support activities. Support activities. And these are business functions that assist the primary activities. Right? So they are not directly related to the product or service, but they are essential. They are necessary for supporting the primary activities. And we'll look at some examples in the next couple of slides. Okay. Now there are 5 different primary activities, right? And again, keep in mind that this is a slightly older framework. So this actually originated in the manufacturing era, right? So some of the activities you will see are more applicable to manufacturing rather than to service or to modern day digital platforms or what have you. But nevertheless, this does give you a good idea of what a business should do. How should it create value, right? So it is still somewhat applicable. All right. Now, in primary activities, there are 5 different types of activities. We first have inbound logistics, which is the receiving, storing, and distribution of inputs. We have the operations or the manufacturing, which is transforming the inputs into the final product. We have outbound logistics, which is collecting, storing, and distributing the final product to customers. We have sales and marketing, which is basically inducing or marketing to customers to purchase the product and providing a means to do so, whether it's through the website, through phone, or what have you. Then we have customer service, which is the post-sales assistance and maintenance. Okay, so again, a little bit of a manufacturing bent here, but applicable nonetheless. Okay, so these are primary activities, 5 types of primary activities. Let's look at supporting activities. So supporting activities, again, are functions that assist the primary activities, right? And there are 4 different types of these. The first is procurement, which is about managing the supply chain and inventory. The next is technology, which is about offering support to different activities, right? Common support function across activities. The next is human resources, which is self-explanatory. And then we have firm infrastructure, right? The general firm infrastructure, which comprises of administrative functions across the activities such as management, finance, legal, and so on. Right? And you could, to some extent, include HR in here. But in the traditional value chain framework, HR is included as a separate support activity. Okay. All right, so this slide depicts visually how a business transforms the inputs into creating value for its customer, into the final outputs, right? Notice the use of the word margin here, and we'll get into this now. What is margin and what is value? Why do we use the word value chain here, right? So value is the amount the customer is willing to pay for the resource, product, or service that your business is offering. Right? That's value. Margin is the difference between the value of an activity and the cost of an activity, right? So it costs you as a business a certain amount to do an activity, to perform an activity, right? Whether it's inbound logistics or manufacturing or creating the product or service or marketing it, each activity has a cost associated with it. Each activity also adds certain value to the final product or service, right? The difference between the value that an activity adds and the cost that it incurs is called the margin. It's called the activity's margin. As you can imagine, the final margin on your final product or service is the sum of the individual margins of each of your activities. Okay. All right, and we can see that in this example here. This is a drone manufacturer's value chain. Right, so we all know what drones are. We take the traditional manufacturing example here. So we have, here are the primary activities on the top, and the supporting activities are here at the bottom. This is the legend for those. In the primary activities, we have first acquire drone parts. That's the inbound logistics part. Then produce the drone, in other words, manufacture the drone. Ship the drone, so outbound logistics, right? Marketing and sales. And lastly, customer service. Right? These are the primary activities in the drone manufacturer's value chain. Then we have supporting activities like procurement, so managing supplier relationships, right? Selecting suppliers, right? Which supplier offers the lowest cost versus a good product, right? Versus the quality and so on. Investigating new designs. This could be the technology part of it, right? Hiring and supporting the employees of the firm. That's the HR support activity. And then managing the company resources, right? So finance, accounting, legal, etc. would come here. So each primary activity has its own margin, has its own value that it adds, and its own cost that it incurs. And the final margin is basically, the total margin is the sum of the individual margins. The total margin for the support activities is the sum of the individual margins, and then you get the total margin for the drone manufacturer. Okay. Again, this is a bit theoretical in nature, right? The actual profit margins are not calculated this way usually, right? So this is not something you would see in accounting per se, but it's nice to get an idea of what value is and what cost is, right? All right. Now let's take a step back. Why are we studying this, right? Why study a value chain in an information systems course? Well, if you think about it, information systems often support each of these activities, right? So information systems often help in either adding value to an activity or reducing its cost, right? Information systems are often used to replace, for example, a manual process, right? In that case, information systems are reducing the cost of an activity. Right? And by doing so, by either adding value or reducing cost, information systems are helping support the competitive advantage of the firm, right? They're helping support the organizational strategy, right? So that's why it's important to understand the value chain a little bit, because we want to understand what should our information systems do, right? What is the bigger picture behind why we are implementing certain information systems and so on, okay? All right, so think about, as you are working through your group project, think about your startup's value chain. Right now, agreed this has a little bit of a manufacturing bent to it, and we're looking at tech startups in the class, but still you might have some things in inbound logistics or operations or outbound logistics, marketing and sales and service that you might be able to think about for your specific business, right? All right. Next, we come to the idea of business processes.